As RPGs have evolved and been refined over time, like any source of media, how we go presenting the RPGs changed. Although the classic dungeon crawl where you kick in the door, slay the monsters, and grab all the loot is still fun and a great experience played by many groups, including mine, the movement towards more complex and heavy narrative in games has increased with time. As the stories of RPGs can rival books, TV shows, and movies more than ever, I see a tool that we could use when crafting our RPGs that's been used by humankind for literally thousands of years. That tool is known today as the Monomyth, or Classic Hero's Journey. I'm not going to go into the history of the Monomyth. Lots of people way smarter than me have already done that. What I can do for you is help you use one of the oldest story formats in your campaign. I mean, most of the greatest stories in human history are built upon this rough format. Yet, after all this time, we haven't gotten bored of it. Since this is just the foundation of the story, like the skull is the foundation of your face, the end product can be very different. And this isn't just ancient stories like the Iliad, the Odyssey, Gilgamesh. Think of Star Wars, The Matrix, Terminator 2, Lord of the Rings, Silence of the Lambs, Jaws, Enter the Dragon, Karate Kid. You would legitimately be surprised what stories actually follow this same format. Best part is, you can use this tool to write an individual adventure, while also using it to make an overlaid full campaign. First, let's look at what the Classic Hero's Journey looks like.
She's tough.
I wanna buy a gun. He's talking like trash, but I'm more interested in something that'll take the head off a honky at 20 pesos.
She's dangerous. She's all woman. She's Leroy's mama. And as long as she's alive, the surf Nazis must die.
No, that's not it. There we go. Of course, there are variations of this, different terms for different steps, and since this is supposed to be for a collaborative game and not a set story, we'll have to modify it a little bit for our own purposes. The Monomyth normally has around 12 steps to it. You'll notice it also separated into 3 parts to help you sort of judge how long you should spend in each part of the journey and where the transitions are. These transition points are what ties the whole thing together, and trust me, they are important. Step 1. The ordinary world. The characters find themselves in what they consider a normal world to them. That doesn't mean a world like ours. Their sense of normality could be flying dragons and magical wizards. What I like to do at this stage is run a little micro-adventure. It has nothing to do with the overall story, and its entire purpose is to cement what normal means. Step 2. Call to adventure. This is where the characters start to get introduced to the fact that there is something bigger happening. I not only like to run a quick encounter or two that are themed to the story, but I like to throw in things like rumors, gossip, and clues that point towards something being a little off. Step 3. Meet the mentor. Gandalf, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Morpheus, Mr. Miyagi. It's someone that knows about the situation, but is unwilling or unable to see the entire storyline to the end by themselves, or maybe even at all. In RPG terms, this is often, but not always, the quest giver. Step 4. Refusal of the call. Normally in this story, this is where the heroes show their reluctance in going on the adventure. Because of this, it's one of the hardest parts of the Monomyth to use in an adventure. Frankly, it's one of the steps I'm most likely to skip if I'm going to skip anything. However, I have had luck using some tricks to get players to temporarily be reluctant to go on the quest, like showing them that there are other adventurers more eager or able to answer the call, but then later remove that group so the responsibility falls back squarely into the lap of the players. Step 5. Crossing the threshold. This is where the real adventure begins. The heroes leave their normal lives and head into a very different world. Luke leaves Tatooine. The children fall into Narnia. John Connor accepts the help of the Terminator. The hobbits leave the Shire. Their worldview is shaken up, and there's no going back now. Step 6. Test allies and enemies. This is the big one. This is where the meat and potatoes of the story lay. If it's a full campaign, you may have multiple adventures in this stage tied to the story. If this format is just being used for a single adventure, then most of the encounters, combat, social, or exploration, will take place. In an RPG, this is the supportive area for the story elements. Collecting the pieces of the artifact, investigating clues about the cult, seeking out the places of power. Many of the important NPCs and villains should be introduced and established at this time. Step 7. The Approach. One of the older names for this was the Belly of the Whale, since that was a commonly used trope at one point in time for stories. You'd be surprised how often it was used. Although it's listed here as its own step, it's sort of a part of Step 6. It's just that it's so important of a key factor and sometimes handled on its own that it is included as its own step. Think of the Millennium Falcon getting pulled into the Death Star in Star Wars: A New Hope. They found themselves right in the middle of what they were fighting, but they weren't yet ready to fight it. So they had no choice but to flee. Step 8. The Ordeal. Before the characters fully escape the Belly of the Whale scenario, a major confrontation should occur. This confrontation usually results in a great loss of some kind. Think of Obi-Wan facing Vader in A New Hope on the Death Star. The main characters escape, but at the loss of the life of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Almost the exact same thing happens with Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. The group escapes this hostile alien environment, only to lose someone precious to them. Step 9. The Reward. This step allows the heroes to escape the Belly of the Whale with some great reward. Something that gives them hope against what seems like insurmountable odds. Step 10. The Road Back. This step is the second transition step and is the opposite of crossing the threshold. Albeit short, this step is here to mirror that of Step 5. The heroes often have to return somehow to something that represents their normal world in some way. Step 11. The Return, or the Resurrection. The heroes are now back in their world of normality. This step shows the contrast that they are no longer the people that left that world. They are heroes of power and legend now, not just the ordinary folk they started as. They, in a sense, have been reborn as something new. And it's this step that shows it off. Step 12. Return with the Elixir. Often, but not always, using the reward from Step 9, the heroes resolve the final conflict one way or another. This is the end of the conflict and the conclusion of the story. Now, this classic story structure may need to be adjusted a little and reorganized a little for interactive game scenarios versus, a pre-written story. Especially Step 4, Refusal of the Call. This isn't even the only way to interpret this structure, it's just a loose foundation that you can build upon. You don't have to stick to it. It's like rules in RPGs. They're there, but they can be modified, they can be bent, sometimes you can even break them. The Monomyth can become even more detailed by splitting each step into 3, the primer, the transition, and the conclusion. But honestly, I find those aren't really needed in a tabletop game since the players are making the decision and not a single writer. Remember, this is a general guideline on how to write the story part of an adventure or campaign. You can mix and match encounters as needed throughout, although I do suggest you match the encounters to the theme of the steps if you can. Examples of this would be having an encounter with mundane and normal entities or situations like local gang members or bullies in Step 1, the ordinary world. Whereas in Step 5, crossing the threshold, that's a good time to finally introduce encounters that are very different or special to the theme of the story. There are 2 things I really want to focus on that are needed to tie the Monomyth together. I group them because they kind of get mixed when used. Okay, I'm going to say this in a little bit of a complicated manner, but it really gets to the point. And don't worry, I'm going to explain what they mean in a moment. Firstly, repetition breeds familiarity. Familiarity results in connection. Connection leads to ownership, and ownership creates investment. And number 2, the initial entrance into an element should have a juxtaposed similarity to the exit from that same element. This duality reinforces transformation or transition within the mind while cementing familiarity in that very juxtaposition. Alright, let's pick those points apart and see what the hell that gobbledygook meant. First, we'll start with familiarity through repetition. When a person sees the same element in the story over and over, whether it's an item, NPC, ideal, name, etc., they start to gain some familiarity with that element. As a person becomes familiar with it, they become connected to that element and start to even feel like it's a part of their thoughts and identity. It is now a part of them, like they have partial ownership over it. You see this all the time with fan bases, memes, even advertising. People like things that they identify as part of their core. This is why fan communities see many of their members becoming stronger and stronger fans with time, even if the quality of what they're fans of degrades. It's not just because they like the content, but because they feel it is now a part of their core identity. The familiarity and repeated exposure has left them connected and invested. This is a great way to create connection with certain elements you want in the forefront of the story, such as important NPCs. The PCs need not meet an NPC right away, but maybe they should hear about the NPC from others, or find clues about the NPC's actions in the world. Do this multiple times, and the NPC starts to feel like a real element that the players are connected to. This familiarity is needed for the next part. To get the players invested in the Monomyth while still creating that fantastical experience, you not only want familiarity, but in steps 5 and 10, you want a contrast between them. Let me give you an example. You're in an adventure that you've written that takes the group into the depths of hell. In step 5, when you leave the physical world, you describe to them a gateway with an evil hellscape. The gate is a dilapidated and creepy stone arch. But then in step 10, when the group comes back to the normal world, show a similar but opposing gate. One that is well maintained and shows a peaceful landscape. Remind them of the gate that used to be there and how this one contrasts to it. Instantly, their minds make the connection and solidify the experience as a whole because of this. It's an element that's familiar, but shows the mind a transition is taking place. Okay, useful, but what if you don't want to use gateways each time? Well, any repeatable element can be used to represent transformation or transition in one way or another. Let's get crazy for a moment. In Terminator 2, there is something you may not even realize you've connected to. That is the act of dropping something and stepping on it. When John Connor first meets the Terminator, he is transitioning from being a carefree child to an adult in the place of danger. To show this, the Terminator initially is carrying roses, a sign of love and innocence. He drops the roses to reveal a shotgun, a sign of the new dangerous world that John is entering. As the Terminator steps forward, he steps on the roses, crushing John's innocence right as John is transitioning into a new, terrifying world of killer robots right as the first fight with the T-1000 begins. Stepping on something happens more than once in that movie. It only happens a few times, but it is enough to breed a connection of familiarity, even if you're not consciously realizing it. For example, when Sarah Connor is attempting to escape the mental facility and is being chased by the T-1000, she comes across her worst nightmare as the Terminator walks out of the elevator. The Terminator is wearing sunglasses like in the first movie, something that dehumanizes him and makes him feel more cold and distant. But during the course of the scene, the glasses are dropped, and this very human-looking eyes are revealed. As he steps forward, he crushes the glasses, stepping on them. The very symbol of his inhumanity crushed under his feet. Suddenly, he changes from being the cold killing machine to the guardian and protector, even if it takes Sarah a little while to accept this. But these small steps are like micro versions of what I'm talking about for repetition and contrasting transition. Now, this level of subtlety doesn't always work well in an RPG with your players. I'm not saying it won't. I personally have pulled off subtle elements like this and the players never realized it consciously, but they did subconsciously and it worked. But don't be afraid to be a little more blunt with the elements you use for them. Go ahead, slap them upside the head with it. So there you have it, the steps of the classic hero's journey for use in writing for RPGs, as well as some important elements to help you connect that story in the player's mind. And remember, you can use this format multiple times, like some sort of Russian nesting doll of writing. Your campaign could be using this format, well, a single adventure could also be using this format. My goal here isn't to give you a strict set of rules to write your campaign by. There are tons of other ways to write as the leader of the game. What I wanted to do was just give you some insight in how you could use this ancient and well-known tool as one of the ways to make a brilliant and connected story for your players that they'll hopefully talk about for years to come. And if you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button, little bell, all of that good stuff. The links are down below if you want to join our Discord for a little bit more chitter chatter about what's going on and maybe ideas for future videos. Also, if you really like what I do and you want to throw me a couple of bucks, the link for the Patreon is down below. I'd appreciate it, but it's not needed. Mostly, I just want people to hang out with, chit chat, and have some fun. Thanks for joining, and as always, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a good one, eh?